Lead Time is a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective, hosted by Tim Allman and Jack Caliberg. Lead Time taps into biblical wisdom for practical solutions to today's burning issues. Each podcast confronts real-time struggles facing the local church in a post-Christian culture. Step into the action with the ULC at uniteleadership.org. This is Lead Time.
Happy day. Welcome to Lead Time. Tim Allman here, and Jack Caliberg is still with his family, but do not fret. We have a wonderful leader and a new friend of mine, Ben Griffin, today. Ben is a pastor, consultant, and strategist. He loves people. That's what I've been so impressed with you, Ben. You are a passionate lover of people. Sometimes I wonder if all leaders and pastors deeply love people. I don't ask that question when I'm around Ben Griffin. He wants them to discover their unique God-given calling. He's been directly involved in launching a dozen churches most recently, and his longest tenured church was the Alley Church. You can look that up, founding pastor there for over 10 years. Where was the Alley at? Where is it at, Ben?
In Minnesota, on the east side of the Twin Cities.
East side of Minnesota, love it. So look up The Alley, Minnesota. Ben currently serves as the executive director, CEO of Link Ministries International, a national nonprofit focused on leadership development and new ministry starts. With Link, he has been raising up a diversity of urban leaders. That's what I love about Link. Let's start in the city. Urban leaders across the USA and beyond. He's also the proud father of 3 young adult children and is over 2 decades of a lifetime into his awesome adventure with his wife, Kate. You also love kayaking and watching superhero movies. So what's your favorite superhero movie?
Oh, man. I liked Iron Man before Iron Man was a thing. So I got to stick with him.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
The comic book.
I don't know if I read the comic or I was a cartoon guy. So there must have been some cartoon years ago. But yeah, Iron Man is my guy. Okay. He was anyway. Yeah.
I love it. So let's start the conversation off with a conversation on power. We'll get a little high level, and then we'll get super practical. I've been reflecting a lot, Ben, about leadership and the lure, the attraction of power, and how Jesus just displays something totally counter to grabbing onto. The culture wars today are so much about power, and even then within the church, who gets to make what decisions, who gets what rights and privileges, the control element there. So just talk about how Jesus is calling us to a different way of leading, Ben.
Wow, I'm so glad you asked that question, Tim, because I feel like the people that we really need to be leaders are usually the ones who think that they don't want to be leaders. Like, who do you want to be president? The one who doesn't want it. Right? Versus the people who are just chasing after it. And I just think that's that humble approach of Jesus. And that's part of the approach we have with Link. We don't look for the seasoned, have it all together, here we go leader. We actually look for people who have some very basic qualities. We call them the E4 qualities. We take them from Ephesians chapter 4. And if those characteristics are present, man, we can walk with you to grow as a leader. But we are not looking for that fully formed, got all the experience, here we go. And frankly, I think too many people are chasing after positions, and too few people are thinking about how they're called to serve. And that's real leadership. That's what Jesus calls us to.
Absolutely. What are those characteristics in Ephesians 4?
Yeah, so Ephesians 4, we pull them out this way: kingdom-minded, so about the kingdom. Persistent will, so going to press on, grit, spiritual grit, no matter what. Humble heart is another one. Collaborative spirit is the fourth one.
Shoot and score. I mean, if you find someone with those right characteristics, it's game on. And especially a humble heart. How do you define humility? What's humility look like?
Wow, man, I always go back to that simple definition that C.S. Lewis gave. Like, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And I don't know if you've read this. There's this great little book by Tim Keller called The Art of Self-Forgetfulness or something like that. Tiny little book, $5 buy. The whole thing is about how we think too much of ourselves, and humility is really our pride just being in a healthy place, not putting it down or not overly confident, but just a realistic, healthy place, understanding who we are. I mean, fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. It's also the beginning of humility. So that's where I would come from.
Yeah, that's so good. I've been thinking a lot about the fear of God, and I really believe the Lutheran, because Ben, you and I are both lifers in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and the best part of our theology, I think, is the right understanding of the law and the weightiness of the law, crushing and killing me, and then the gospel, the Holy Spirit breathing new life into dry bones with Ezekiel, and being raised up in this mighty army as one who has unique gifts, but recognizing your need, obviously, for Christ and his grace, his mercy, his blood to cover you daily. And then that I'm in this together with people. And I have a very small part, but I find meaning and purpose in my small part in God's grand narrative. Like the gospel is the best thing going, right, Ben?
You know it is. Yeah, that's it. That'll preach, Tim. Thank you.
sorry to get all preachy on you, but no, Jesus is
good.
The best.
Preacher's got to preach,
Jesus
man.
brings joy. Jesus brings joy, right? And power. Whenever I think of power and like attaining this place of status, and you know me, I'm in conversations around our synod, and even some people may even be nominating me for synod president, which is just ridiculous, which is just kind of funny because I have no desire to ever do that. And
which
all
is
I
why,
really want
based on the definition I gave earlier, is why you probably should be.
No, I probably should not be, Ben, but I have a lot more to learn. And I think the first and second half of life, have you reflected on first and second half of life? Ego being built up, second half of life is the right understanding of ego, and then recognizing how little you know about the more I know, the more I realize I don't know, and then I want to know. And really, at the end of the day, all I really want to know, Ben, is Christ. Right?
Yeah, amen. Well, that's the definition of wisdom right there, Tim. Yeah, knowing how little you don't know. That's so good.
So, let's just talk about the LCMS real quick. It seems like the desire to control and defend the gospel, especially around how leaders are formed, delves into various power dynamics within our church body, and it doesn't feel or often sound like Jesus in the early church. Any thoughts? Any thoughts there?
Well, you know, I'm not one that says to stop doing what we are doing in forming pastors, but I am one that really believes that we need to empower every pastor, every church, everyone to be looking at what their calling is and bring the equipping of that calling to the ground level. And I don't think it's any news to anybody that the streams have dried up for leadership development in the current way things have been happening, and they're drying up. And I wonder if part of that is because we have so systemized and locked into a system, and we've moved away. And I say we much larger than just the LCMS. We, as in the Christian church, have moved away from leadership development, whether it's pastoral or other, the way that Jesus laid it out. I mean, really, real leadership development, in my opinion, is steeped in discipleship. And if you look at what Jesus did, the first thing he said to his disciples was, "Come, follow me." And how often is that the first step? How often are we even putting that invitation out there? I think it's fascinating that the church in general, and I'm talking again largely, but the LCMS is a part of this, has been talking about leadership development and investing in leadership development for decades. Yet we have less leaders and less pastors, less workers in our churches, or even often volunteers in our churches than we've ever had before. And I think the reason is, even though we've been focusing on leadership development, we've been doing it from pulpits, we've been doing it from classrooms, we've been doing it from stages, and we haven't done the real work of leadership development, or at least not poured into it, which is life on life. It's hard, it's messy, it takes time, and it produces a whole lot of fruit. And that's essentially the model that we follow. And we have guys, many of them, who go into the seminary programs. In fact, they're incredible. They're doing these full-time seminary classes, working full-time, leading churches at the same time. Just incredible human beings. So we're not against those systems, but we work on the ground level, looking for the people that God's laid that on their heart, and just come alongside of them. I see this in you. I believe in you. Let's walk together, and let's build around you the things you need to grow into the leader God's called you to be. And I really do think that's missing. And I don't know about you, Tim, but it's the people in my life who saw me and said, hey, I think you have the potential to be a pastor. I think you have the potential to be a leader. Those sparks, those pieces, those people who were there make all the difference. And when we systemize, we can lose that, what I think is the heart of real leadership development, which is the relational component.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I sometimes wonder if a lot of our pastors have forgotten their story about how they came to do what they do, and how the heart of it for I'd say for all of us, right, is the life on life discipleship. My DCE, and now as an SMP pastor, Tim Lindemann, was speaking life into me as a high schooler, giving me leadership opportunities to lead Bible studies. I mean, apart from that, at 16 years old, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. He discipled me, and he cast vision for my life, and saw things in me that I didn't see in myself, and like, have pastors lost that ability to tell that story? Because I think that's very attractive, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah, it sure is. And think about your motivation for ministry, Tim. It wasn't for power or position or to be able to have authority in any way. It was a calling for you that grew out of somebody seeing that in you. I mean, that's so powerful. And I don't have the data on this, but it sure seems like that's happening less and less today.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe here's maybe one thing why I think we've disconnected discipleship from the Missio Dei, from evangelism, from God's work in the world. The way we talk about discipleship is it's not just character and content and formation, which it is, but then it's the craft, the doing, the living out of your unique calling, given your respective vocation, all for the sake of those who don't know Jesus, that you want to rub shoulders, learn with, and love those who the world often discards, and even the church kind of discards, the non-church churchy people, right? So talk about the connection between discipleship and the Missio Dei.
Man, I don't know how you separate them. I mean, that's Matthew 28. While you're going about, make disciples. And the interesting thing is, for a disciple to become a disciple, that relationship, they don't start often in a place of faith or belief. And how many of those stories are we hearing in LCMS churches these days? I'll tell you, one of the greatest joys for me is a church planter, because, I was at a great church coming out of seminary. I mean, a fantastic church, amazing, great ministry happening. But what we didn't see in that church was an overflow of new believers. We just in that stage at that time. Not that it didn't happen, and there were some really cool stories, but it wasn't this high percentage of new members were new believers. But I had heard at the time that new churches reach new people, and that was attractive to me, that we could be doing things in a way that engage communities in a different way with the gospel. And I heard that, but the really fun part was seeing it happen. And I just saw over and over in the 10 years that I was pastoring a church, God would bring people in waves to our church. He would bring a wave of mature believers, followed by a wave of brand new believers. And the relationships that grew out of that were unbelievable and so powerful. And there's one guy in particular, I think year 2 into the church plant, he was bawling in the front of the church. And there's a whole long story. Essentially, he was on the verge of losing his family. He had his DUI and all these things. Life was falling apart around him, and he thought it was over. But that was his moment of surrender. And Somebody saw him, started walking with him. A whole church came around him. That guy, 8 years later, was an elder in the church, discipling other people. I mean, that's when just only God. Only God.
Only God.
Yeah, and that's where I don't know how you separate, because real discipleship is us growing, and when we share our life and live our faith, that is the natural result of what happens. And I do think that we underestimate the power of the kitchen table and the grill and the backyard in our work of engaging people with the gospel. We make it way more complicated. Classes and saying the right words, and it's much more about loving your neighbor and consistency and presence. And I mean, I could go off on a whole thing just talking about spiritual parenting and that piece too, but man, that they're so intimately connected.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of this is pretty much all of what Link does. Link International does, right? It teaches people and finds people and releases people. So tell us the 100%. Link story as the president CEO. Now, I'm sure not a title you thought you would have, a number of years either, but I know you're just such a humble leader and you just want to release people. So you're in the right seat to see a gospel explosion. Tell us the Link story there, Ben.
Yeah, so long story short, Link started about 20 years ago in Houston. A guy named Mark Junkins, some of you listening might know him. Talk about an entrepreneur. He's a true apostle. Like, I think about apostles, that gift of apostle is like the mushroom eater. I don't know if you've ever heard this term before, but like, how do you know if a mushroom is going to kill you or taste amazing? Somebody's got to eat that thing. So Mark's the guy who's just like, let's try this. Let's see if it works. If it kills me, you guys go the other direction. So 20 some years ago in Houston, Mark is looking around and he goes, man, there's just a bunch of leaders in the city who need help. So let's do something to come around them and help them. And that's where it was born. And Mark is one of those guys. He was like, well, it seems like it would be helpful if I knew Spanish, because a lot of these guys speak Spanish. So he learned Spanish. And he's like, well, it seems like it would be helpful if I'm a pastor. So I think he went through the Delto program at the time. He became a pastor. So that was the birth of Link. That concept caught on there, but then also other people around the country were like, we'd like to do something similar. So links started popping up in other places, all independent. In fact, even now you'll find links that are not connected to our link, but that use the name and have some similar even logo and stuff. And then about 5-6 years ago, kind of came to the realization, as some of those were struggling, some were going different direction, like, hey, what if we brought those links under one umbrella and we kind of multiplied our impact that way? And so about 5-6 years ago, Link went through a transformation where it really moved from Houston-based supporting ministry otherwise to nationally engaging with cities across the country. And so right now we're in 7 cities across the United States. Link then also, we've redefined what Link, L-I-N-C, stands for. It stands now for leaders in community with each other in community, but also leaders in the E is silent, community. And the goal with our goal is that everyone would be able to experience the gospel in terms they can understand from someone they know. And we know the best way for that to happen is when local leaders in their own neighborhood, their own community, their own language, ethnic background, they're like empower people where they're at to reach people with the gospel. Because Tim, the traditional model for training up pastors is let's say we find somebody in North Minneapolis. That's a hard inner city neighborhood here in Minnesota. So what traditional model is, we find this great young man, we pluck him out of his community, we move him into a different cultural education system for 4 to 8 years, and then maybe they'll go back and do work in the community he came from. And it's okay if that person goes elsewhere, but that's the traditional model. What we do is say, instead of taking that talent, that leader out of their community, how do we build the resources and programming and structure around them so they can be successful in the community that they're already in? And it's incredible to see what happens. Then once we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leaders in that community, we collaborate them together. And it's really a fun thing to see, because ultimately, if we're doing our job, we start to see revival in communities and neighborhoods and cities for the gospel. So that's the long story. I guess I said the long story short, but I still went the long form.
It's so good. And so what is needed right now, get a little bit more detailed in what that training looks like for your leaders.
Yeah. So one of the key phrases for Link is no leader walks alone. And as I talked about earlier, we really take that to heart. Like our leadership development starts with, we're walking with you. I used to work at the Apple computer store, which was a fascinating, fun experience. That was a bivocational thing when I was launching the church. And one of the sayings they had at the Apple store is, if somebody asked you a question, you didn't know the answer, you'd say, well, I don't know, but we probably do. So one of the things we do in developing leaders is we come alongside of them. We have somebody right there with them that starts to create that bigger network, that bigger connection. You're not alone. We're in this with you. I see you, and we walk with you. And so what we do then is customize around the leader what they need to be successful. Things that are the same for just about everybody is we help them build a plan. We connect them with that core navigator or coach, and then we build a network of support around them. And we've got some specific ways we do that, even with the types of people and the types of training we do with that. But at the heart of it, we want to hear what their God-given dream is, and we do everything we can to help move that forward. That has shown up in all these crazy and awesome ways. Church plants in multiple different languages and communities, home for victims of sex trafficking, a mobile bus or a mobile truck that does showers for the homeless and shares the gospel with them, micro school. I mean, you could go down the list. By focusing on the leader, we end up helping engage and start ministries of all different forms, shapes, and sizes.
It's so fascinating as I look at the LCMS ecosystem right now, that the Holy Spirit is converging so many of us in a similar direction. And not in competition or comparison, but just in this open-hearted collaboration. I think of 5.2 there's some overlap, and what the ULC is doing, there's some overlap. We have different kind of maybe focuses and maybe slightly different approaches or methods, but the heart is releasing, equipping, finding people that will multiply disciples. Isn't that about right? That's the converging kind of through line with what the Lord is doing in a number of these organizations right now. Isn't that right, Ben?
Yeah, I see the same thing, and I just can't help but celebrate that. I mean, if we really want to see gospel saturation in our cities, this is a wide, big blue ocean. If we're all sitting on the same piece of water, fishing and thinking that we're gonna no, there's so much territory that we need to all be working together, collaborating in the way that this is happening. And I love the way the Spirit works. That is, this ethos is being caught in so many places.
Well,
all we want to do is fan that flame.
It's the heart of God.
Yeah, amen.
The heart of God.
Wait.
Yeah. He's at work. He's in front of us. Have you thought about? Let's take it up and out a little bit, like a theology of time, a little bit, and how the timeless God, the God who is above time, still obviously in the person of Jesus takes on flesh, and how the Spirit is the divine connector in time toward the fulfillment of time on the last day when Christ returns. And just whenever I think about time, I am just remarkably humbled. And like the Job story of like, who are you? Where were you? Like, and at the very same time, I am remarkably filled with meaning and purpose and passion for making the most of this time. So I another little shout out before I kick it to you. I'm reading this book called Redeeming Your Time right now, and I can't remember the author's name. It just came out. And he does a marvelous job of kind of articulating the above and then the withinness of God. So for anybody listening, Redeeming Your Time is well worth your time. It just came out. There's so many books on time management, and I think that Christians need to be speaking into that space because it's so counter to the anxiety. I got to prove, I got to go. It's like, no, I get to be perfectly present with the God who is perfectly present with me right now. And I'm loving nothing more than hanging out with you in this moment, Ben. So talk about a theology of time, your perspective.
Wow. Well, there's so much to that. I guess what you just said there was really even impactful for me and a good reminder. We don't appreciate the present nearly enough. We tend to dwell on the past or dream about the future, but not just be thankful in the moment and see the beauty of each breath that God's given us and the place that we are. And man, there's so much. What's the book? It's Dale Carnegie wrote a book about not worrying. And he used in there this image of a submarine. And he talked about that if you treat, and he was literally quoting the Bible when he talked about this, about, tomorrow it's enough worries of its own. You don't need to go there. And he talked about in a submarine, when you leave one room, you close the door behind you. You're fully in that room until you get to the next one. You open the door, go into it, and close the next. And to be fully in the moment here today and know that God has tomorrow. He literally, time is a created thing. And that just hurts my head to even think about. Like, how can you be outside of time? But the fact that time is affected by gravity is a variable based on the speed that you're moving. Like, these things it's mind bending. And sometimes my wife, she jokes, she's like, maybe time is speeding up, because it sure feels like as we get older, like these years go by faster and faster. Maybe we just don't all notice it because we're in the same time warp. But it's fascinating to think God created all that, and yet we still worry about things as if we have any control over it. Like, trust him today, and he's got tomorrow.
So amazing. One of the thought experiments I've been doing recently is letting your yes be yes.
Ooh.
And your no be no, whenever and however it comes.
That's good.
And so this gets super theoretical and then like super practical at the very same time. If my mind, let's say the Holy Spirit says, send a text to your wife. Now I'm thinking about it and I really want to send a text to my wife. But if something puts there, like, I want to say yes to it or no to it to move it. And I think too many people live with so many different kind of prompts with no action taken to the prompt, that then we're guilty about what we've just like neglected. And then we have no focus for the future. Like, just from the smallest thing to the largest thing, take some action. And then do you have some sort of a system to get it out of your head, whether it's online or a piece of paper or whatever. This is why human beings love to do lists, because there's a sense of relief, immediate, and then there's a sense of urgency that is going to come with the action steps around that respective to-do list. But yeah, how do you manage your time, since we're talking about time?
Well, for me, I mean, I could talk very practically about that, because it is a big deal for me. There's a lot going on, and balance with family and life is really important. Thinking through your ideal week, I think, is a really important thing. And then having some principles and rules and accountability around that is wise. I think a lot of us get overstressed but underproductive because we simply don't prioritize and do the most important things that we're supposed to do or that we should be doing. And it's amazing. They do. I think there's studies that say 80% of your work happens with 20% of your time. And to me, I want to be as productive as possible for the kingdom. And I got that Enneagram 3 in me. I want to produce, I want to move, and I want to push. But I also know the importance of balance and taking time away and taking time off. So even like on a large scale, so we're an organization that fundraises. So I'm always kind of thinking about and carrying that and the needs there. But on the large scale, every January and July, I cut back fundraising activity to almost nothing except for praying to God, because I trust him as the provider. And those kind of rhythms of go and rest, they play out in every part of life. And I learned that the hard way. I thought I could preach 7, 8, 10 times in a row as a local church pastor. That's actually not good for me or our church, right?
Anyone.
It's just not good. And it actually took opportunities away from other people. It reduced the quality of what I was bringing and preaching and burning out. Like, we need those rhythms of go. And I have a good friend who often talks about how we operate from rest, not for rest. So resting is the starting point, and then we operate out of that, which is just huge. I want to say too, you kind of made me think of this when you were talking earlier. We don't have a lot of cultures, especially in the LCMS, of innovation or trying things, and that's something that I think is a little concerning, because we tend to have church cultures that say, if it doesn't work, or if it doesn't work well, then it was a failure. Oh, that worship service was a failure because only so many people came. This outreach was a failure because, instead of going, all right, we tried this. Like, let's celebrate the try. Let's celebrate we get paralyzed, kind of like that yes and no you were talking about. We can get paralyzed and not move, instead of having a culture that celebrates the try, celebrates the action. And that may be one of the reasons we're not seeing as many leaders pop up as well, because we're telling them you can't lead until you've got it right. And how do you learn how to lead? By getting it wrong a lot. I think it was Brandon. Why am I blanking on his name? It doesn't matter. But there's a recent thing I heard this guy say where he said that people who are successful actually fail more than people who are unsuccessful. They just keep pressing on. And that's the part that a lot of people miss. Is keep trying, keep pressing, persistent will. And that culture is lacking in a lot of our churches.
Well, it's not a culture of grace.
No.
It's a culture of law.
Yeah.
You're setting up all these boundaries, and the law will inevitably crush. The law leads us to fear God,
Yeah.
But are we living out of our gospel identity in Christ? And there's so much freedom. There's so much freedom when you recognize my will. I'll get Luther here. My will has been bound to Christ, right? And then but raised up because of Christ. And now I am free to live in my calling with a sense of curiosity and adventure and wonder and trying and failing and not having my identity defined by what I do, but by what's been done by Christ. Like it's just insidious how much Satan gets in and creates this like culture of fear. And people are like, I think in the national conversation in the LCMS, like we can say so-and-so is the problem. Like if it only had a new leader that's not it. It's not about any one person. It's about a culture of fear. We are not living out, I think, in many respects. Innovation is not occurring because we're living bound and crushed by and not raised to newness of life by the gospel, crushed by the law and this. Yeah. So sorry to get going, but it's all at the end of the day. It's all the lies of the enemy, that kind of just keep us down. So anything else on that topic?
Too. Well, just thanks for saying that, because our battle's not against flesh and blood. And we do tend to create you versus me all the time.
Come on.
Instead of, aren't we working towards the same? Aren't we working for the same king? I think Charles Spurgeon once said that if you try to tune 1,000 pianos or 100 pianos to each other, you never will. But if you tune them all to the same tuning fork, all the pianos will be in tune with each other. And way too often we're looking at each other and, I'm out of sync with you, or I'm upset about that, instead of, hey, no, we got to all look to the same king. And if we're in tune with him, we're going to be in tune with each other.
I was talking to Bill Woolsey a little bit ago, and this is stuck in my heart, and I hope it never leaves. But he was talking about Mark 6, and he always talks about 5-2, right? 5 loaves, 2, or is it 5 and 2? 5 loaves, 2 fish, or the other way around? Remind me here, Ben.
Yeah, I think it's 5
loaves and 2 fish.
Yep.
There we go. Yeah, good.
Yep.
Be confident. But he was talking about how fascinating it is when Jesus has the disciples and they come up and kind of collectively say, hey, send them away.
Yeah.
Send them away. Watch the pronouns. And Jesus says, no, you give them something to eat. You bring them near. What were the disciples actually saying? Like, we're near to you, Jesus. Like, we're on the right side. We get to be in your inner circle. And Jesus said, you have no idea who I am and why I've come and who I'm for. They're my people. I am they. We're all those people. And it is the insidious lie of the enemy that seeks to divide us as those nearer, more proximate to Christ than others. It's pretty sad.
It is.
So, hey, let's pivot here a little bit, get super practical down the home stretch. What are your favorite like developmental tools for leaders? Or assessments even in finding, we use 3D language, right? Discover, developing, and deploying women and men for their works of following Jesus using their gifts. So what tools do you use to help discover leaders?
Yeah, that's interesting. I love to use the D's and we use E's: engage, equip, and empower, and then have a whole process there. That's great. You asked me this ahead of time, and this is an answer probably not expected, but similar to what we were talking about earlier. The best tool that I have seen to just answer that question at its base level is your dinner table, is your kayak, and the really best tool is a stress test. You want to see where somebody's really at, see who they are when they're under stress. I was on an airplane the other day, super friendly people behind me, but then the plane got delayed for an hour. And man, the way that they reacted under stress was just fascinating to me. Like so worried, and so like it was like they were completely different human beings. And one of the things that like when you talk about assessing leaders and where they're at, some of us are really good at interviews, but I want to see what you're like under pressure. So now when we engage people, we try and get into practical situations as much as possible. And man, you want to really see what somebody's made of. Like ask them to do something challenging, do something related to the work that they would be in leadership in. To me, those assessments, we do the personality profiles and all those things. Those are helpful. But when you see in action, especially under stress, that tells you so much.
Yes. We need to be letting people do things more consistently. And
try it.
I think we believe that you have to get a certain amount of content. Like going back to the Mark 6 story, Jesus wants them to test it. Like you figure this out, you know?
Yeah.
Let's go figure this out. Jesus sends out in Luke 10, he sends out the 72 to do what he had done. And we don't give people enough permission to be stressed.
No,
I love that.
Don't. Yeah. And I do love what Jesus does.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just love what he does with his disciples. He says, come follow me. And then the next thing where do they go next? To a wedding, which is fascinating to me. I don't know the culture of the time, but can you imagine coming to a wedding of somebody you know and being like, well, here's my plus 12, like this is where it started, right?
Yeah.
It's just, they're just that life on life. So yeah, I digress.
No, totally. Jesus gave them a front row seat, and I think their weddings were bigger than ours. I know they lasted longer than ours.
Yeah, they might have been like, it's your fault we ran out of wine. You brought 12 people. I have no idea.
Exactly. All right, bro. Hey, last question. This has been super fun. You're a gift, dude. You just bring so much joy to my heart and to our listeners today. This is cool. What should churches, as we look at the world, and I don't want to end dark, I want to end with hope, actually, but what should we be attentive to as you look at the world and our country and its increasingly secular, post-Christian, blah, 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 all those terms? Give us some hope as we look at the world.
Yeah, well, I think there is a lot of hope. I hear a lot of people talk about the church, traditional church is struggling or waning. And you can see there's stats that say a lot of things like that. But I'll say from my perspective, on the ground with the leaders and the ministries we're seeing, God is at work. A revival is at work, but it looks different than it has looked in this last season. And you can actually look historically in the U.S., just over the last 50 years, there was a time where the church was accepted and celebrated in society. Then there was a time where it was the culture was kind of just ambivalent to the church. And now we're in a season where it's actually negative impression of the church. And I'm not sure that we fully figured out or understood for many people in churches that were in that world. But that changed right around 2014 when gay marriage was made legal. And suddenly the church was put into a place of a lot of cultural energy was hostile towards some biblical stances and where people are at. And so being in that reality, it does operate different than the culture being, hand in hand. So I don't know that we're going to go here, but in China and in Russia, they both hit a place where the church was put under intense persecution and even illegal to do a lot of activities the way they currently had. I don't know what degree we'll experience that in the US, but it does look like some of those things could be coming our way. Interestingly enough, in China, the church we all know has flourished. And in Russia, the church after that happened has struggled mightily. Here's the biggest difference in those two cultures. In Russia, the largest church ethos basically had the idea that the pastors, the leaders, the professional church people, they're the ones that led. When they were gone, the church dried up. In China, the mentality was everybody has a role in leading the church. So when the professionals were gone, everybody's in their home going, well, I guess it's my job now in my home. And so the hopeful calling, what should we focus on in our churches, is what we've been talking about all along. And here's how I see this play out. Really cool way. When I go to your traditional suburban church and I say, who here is called to full-time ministry? Everybody points at the guy like you, Tim, right up front. Well, that guy, the professional. When I go to the typical immigrant church, especially African immigrant church, and I say, who here is called to full-time ministry? Every hand goes up, right? We all own that calling. So I really think what we should focus on is the priesthood of all believers and releasing and empowering people to be and do the things God's called them to be and do.
So good, Ben. So good, dude. And this is a part of, I'm sorry to close with LCMS. This is a part of our story. When Stephen comes over here, almost 200 years ago now, and Martin Stephen is the bishop and he's doing his thing. And then it turns out he's doing bad things and they hung out here because CFW Walther said, we're still the church. We're still the church. Where the word is, where the sacrament is, we're the church.
Amen.
And we'll figure it out. We'll figure out how we do this leadership stuff. But the church is here. So thank you. If people want to connect with you, Ben, how can they do so?
Yeah, simplest way. I mean, I'd love to get an email from you. bgriffin@link.org, linc.org. If you catch there, you'll catch me and so many others on our team.
Yeah, so good. And you could just look up Link International, LINC.
linc.org. Yep.
Love it. Love it. Cool. Thanks for the time, listener. It's an honor to have you as a part of the Lead Time family. We have a fresh episode every single week as one of the two podcasts, American Reformation being the other one, where we're having lots of great conversations with leaders all over the church and not just in America, but in the world. You may not know this, Ben, but Alan Hirsch. We just interviewed Alan Hirsch yesterday. One of the foremost missiologists on American Reformation. So uniteleadership.org is where you can get more information on us. If we can help you multiply disciples, it would be our honor. It's a good day. Go and make it a great day. We'll see you next week on Lead Time. Peace. Thanks, Ben.
You've been listening to Lead Time, a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective. The ULC consults and brings together cohorts of congregations to build the culture, systems, and structures of intentional discipleship multiplication. To go deeper with us, create a free login on uniteleadership.org for access to exclusive materials and resources. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for next week's episode.